On the far edge of the galaxy, on a planet called Varus 9, life had once been calm, peaceful, and full of wonder. The alien civilization that lived there had built magnificent cities that shimmered under their twin suns. Towering crystal spires reflected the light in dazzling patterns, while parks and gardens stretched for miles, filled with plants that glowed faintly at night. The aliens, known as the Varelians, were an advanced species. They had explored their world in great detail, studied the stars, and developed technologies that allowed them to live in harmony with their environment. Their society valued knowledge, art, and community, and they spent generations perfecting their culture, building beautiful monuments, and teaching their children the wisdom of the ages. Life on Varus 9 was not just survival. It was a celebration of being alive, a dance of intellect and emotion, of science and creativity intertwined. But all of that changed in the blink of an eye. One day, without warning, a marauder species appeared. These creatures were unlike anything the Varelians had ever seen before. They traveled in massive warships that could tear through the planet's defenses with ease. Their weapons unleashed firepower so devastating that even the most secure structures crumbled in moments. The skies, once bright and clear, filled with smoke, fire, and the harsh glow of explosions. Entire neighborhoods disappeared overnight, leaving behind nothing but rubble and the echoes of screams. The Varelians had never known true violence. They were peaceful by nature, with no army to speak of and no experience in defending themselves against a relentless, merciless enemy. As the days passed, it became painfully clear. Their civilization was on the brink of extinction. The leaders of the Varelians, wise and thoughtful as they were, convened in the great council halls of their capital. These halls were carved from a single giant crystal, designed to resonate with the voices of those who spoke, amplifying wisdom through sound. But even in these hallowed chambers, fear and despair filled the air. The council had to make a choice. They could continue to fight, knowing they would likely be destroyed, or they could attempt something desperate, something that had never been done before. After long hours of debate, they decided on a course of action that was both daring and terrifying. They would send a message across the stars, reaching out to humanity, a species they had heard of only in legends, whispered in stories passed down through generations. The Varelians had always known of humans in theory. Ancient records described them as strong, inventive, and unpredictable, capable of feats that defied expectations. But these records were vague, and no Varelian had ever met a human, let alone relied on one for survival. Sending a message to humans was a risk. It was a leap into the unknown. What if they ignored it? What if humans arrived too late? Or worse, what if humans brought problems of their own? Yet desperation pushed them forward. Survival demanded it. The process of sending the SOS was complex. The Varelians had never needed to communicate so far, so urgently. They gathered their most skilled engineers, scientists, and coders, who worked around the clock, creating a transmission capable of traveling light years through the void of space. They encoded the message with precise coordinates, detailed explanations of their peril, and pleas for immediate assistance. Every word, every signal carried the weight of an entire civilization's hope. But the Varelians did not realize something crucial. The transmission itself, the very act of calling for help, created energy signatures in space. These signatures were not simply a signal for help. They were like a flare in the night, bright and unmistakable. To humans, this signal might seem like a distant SOS, a desperate call for assistance. But for other species, particularly those attuned to hunting and conquest, it was an invitation, a marker pointing directly to a vulnerable, resource-rich world. The Varelians were unaware that their plea might draw attention from entities far more dangerous than the marauders who had already attacked them. As the SOS left Varus 9, racing across the void of space, the Varelians watched the skies anxiously. Every day they scanned for signs of response. They hoped with all their hearts that humanity would hear their call and arrive before it was too late. In the meantime, they did what they could to protect their people. Families huddled in underground shelters. Markets fell silent, and the normally vibrant cities became ghostly shadows of their former selves. Children were kept close to parents. Elders tried to offer comfort, and the entire civilization waited with bated breath for an answer that might never come. Sending the SOS was both an act of courage and an act of sheer desperation. It symbolized the Varelians' willingness to reach beyond their known universe, to put their fate in the hands of a species they had only imagined. It was a message filled with hope, fear, and trust, an acknowledgement that sometimes survival requires taking risks no one can fully predict. Unknown to them, the tiny pulses of energy shooting across space carried more than just a call for help. They carried a beacon that would change the future of Varus 9 forever, bringing allies, enemies, and consequences the Varelians had never imagined. Days stretched into nights and nights into days. The Varelians monitored every signal, every faint blip in the stars, hoping for a human response. Fear and hope danced together in the hearts of every citizen. They knew that sending the SOS could save them, or it could make everything worse. But in that moment there was no other choice. Their civilization depended on it. And somewhere across the galaxy, humans were receiving that desperate cry, unaware of how it would soon draw not just aid, but the attention of far deadlier forces than they had ever encountered. The Varelian cities, though battered and burning, still held signs of their former glory. Towers of crystal, gardens glowing under the night sky, and intricate mosaics told stories of a civilization that valued life, beauty, and knowledge above all. As the SOS streaked across the stars, it carried with it the weight of all these hopes and dreams. It was more than a plea for help. It was a declaration that the Varelians were willing to survive, to fight, and to trust in the courage of strangers. Little did they know that the act of asking for help would set in motion events far greater than any Varelian could have imagined, drawing humans into a conflict that would test courage, loyalty, and the very limits of survival. And while the Varelians waited, hearts heavy with fear and anticipation, the first spark of a bond that would reshape their world, and perhaps the galaxy, was already beginning to form. Within the endless expanse of space, far from Earth and the familiar stars of the solar system, a signal appeared on human monitoring arrays. It was faint at first, a ripple in the electromagnetic spectrum, almost indistinguishable from the usual background noise of space. But human sensors were designed to detect even the smallest anomalies, and soon, trained analysts identified the unmistakable pattern of a distress call. It was not from a human colony, nor from any region humanity had explored. It came from a distant, uncharted planet called Varus 9. The urgency in the message was clear. A civilization was in mortal danger, and they were calling for help. The news reached the upper echelons of human command almost immediately. Across Earth and various human space colonies, military and diplomatic leaders convened in high-security war rooms. Screens displayed the signal's source, the planet's characteristics, and fragmented intelligence about the alien species. While the Varelians' message was polite and measured in tone, the fear and desperation behind it were unmistakable. Experts analyzed the potential threats. Was it a trap? Could responding to this unknown species bring humanity into a war with enemies far beyond their understanding? How advanced were these marauders attacking Varus 9, and what weapons might they possess? The debates were long and tense. Commanders argued over every possible scenario. Some feared that entering an unknown conflict could lead to catastrophe. Humanity had dealt with rogue civilizations before, but nothing as distant or as mysterious as this. There were discussions about waiting for more intelligence, sending small reconnaissance drones, or even ignoring the SOS entirely to avoid the risk. But the very idea of leaving a civilization to perish when help was possible struck a chord with others in the room. Humanity had a history of stepping into crises, even when the cost was uncertain. It was a fundamental part of their ethos. Never ignore a call for help, no matter how distant or dangerous it might seem. In the end, principle won over caution. The decision was made. Humans would respond. Orders were given to assemble a fleet of advanced warships, ships designed for both exploration and combat. These vessels were equipped with cutting-edge technology, including energy shields, adaptive weaponry, and hyperlight engines capable of traversing vast stretches of space in record time. Crews trained rigorously, preparing for every possible scenario. Simulations ran non-stop, imagining battles with unknown enemies, evacuations of alien civilians, and the need to coordinate with species whose language and customs were entirely foreign. As the fleet launched, leaving the familiar planets and stars behind, anticipation filled the hearts of everyone on board. The journey would take days, even at hyperlight speeds, and the crew knew that time was critical. The distress signal suggested that Varus 9 was already on the brink of annihilation. Cities were being destroyed, populations were in hiding, and every moment of delay could mean the difference between life and death. The human commanders studied the data repeatedly, noting the planet's geography, its cities, and the likely positions of enemy forces. Every decision had to be precise. Mistakes could cost countless lives, both human and alien. Meanwhile, on Varus 9, the Varelians could do nothing but wait. Their eyes scanned the skies for the first sign of arrival. They had little hope left, yet a spark of anticipation flared when the signal's trajectory indicated that help might actually be coming. Families remained in shelters trying to maintain some sense of routine amid the chaos. Leaders organized what remained of their defenses, hoping that reinforcements would arrive before it was too late. Their faith rested entirely on the humans responding to the SOS, a species they knew only from legends and whispers, but they had no other choice. As the human fleet approached, sensors picked up the destruction on the surface of Varus 9. The planet's cities were reduced to rubble, smoke rising in vast plumes that could be seen from orbit. Fires burned in what had once been bustling marketplaces. Streets lay empty, save for those who had hidden in shelters too afraid to move. The attacking marauders had no intention of stopping. Their forces were relentless, sweeping across the surface with advanced weaponry, leaving devastation in their wake. It was clear that any delay could mean complete annihilation. Upon entering Varus 9's orbit, human commanders acted with remarkable precision. Ships deployed in calculated formations, creating defensive barriers to protect key areas of the planet. Tactical drones scouted ahead, identifying enemy positions and weak points in the marauder forces. Humans had studied alien warfare tactics and adapted their strategies to account for the unknown technologies of the attackers. Every action was coordinated with meticulous care, blending years of military training with real-time analysis of alien technology. As the first human forces descended toward the surface, their presence alone sent a powerful message. The marauders, who had been confident in their dominance, now faced opponents they had never imagined. Human weapons struck with accuracy and power, disabling enemy vehicles and disrupting formations. Cities that had seemed doomed began to experience pockets of hope as humans, and surviving Varelians began to work together. Coordination between species was challenging. Languages had to be deciphered, strategies communicated through gestures and holographic interfaces, but humans adapted quickly, using technology and intuition to overcome every barrier. The tide of battle began to turn. Where the marauders had once swept unchecked, they now met organized resistance. Human precision, combined with alien knowledge of their own world, allowed defenders to reclaim key areas. Civilians cautiously emerged from shelters inspired by the arrival of aid. The Varelians, who had been prepared for the worst, could finally see a glimmer of hope, a chance to survive. Yet the victory was not easy. Humans faced unfamiliar terrain, strange alien technology, and enemies who fought with ruthless efficiency. But their discipline, training, and ability to adapt under pressure proved decisive. Small units coordinated with orbital ships, creating synchronized attacks that dismantled enemy positions. Each maneuver was calculated to minimize civilian casualties while maximizing impact against the marauders. It was a delicate balance, but one that human forces managed with remarkable skill. As the days passed, the human intervention became the defining factor in the survival of Varus 9. What had begun as a desperate plea for help was now a full-scale rescue operation. The Varelians, once on the brink of despair, found new courage in the presence of humans. Families reunited, children returned to the streets under careful supervision, and leaders began planning not only for survival, but for rebuilding their world. Humans did not simply fight. They guided, protected, and coordinated efforts to stabilize the planet. Their presence became both shield and symbol, showing that even in the darkest moments, hope could arrive from the most unexpected places. By the time the initial waves of marauder attacks were repelled, the humans had proven that their commitment to answering the SOS was not in vain. They had arrived in time to prevent the complete destruction of a civilization, turning what seemed like an inevitable disaster into a story of survival and courage. The alien cities, though scarred and battered, were no longer abandoned wastelands. Streets were cleared, shelters secured, and the foundations of recovery began to form. The Varelians, who had doubted that anyone would answer their call, now recognized the humans as allies, saviors, and friends even as the battle continued, with pockets of resistance still needing attention. It was clear that the presence of humans had changed everything. The aliens' hope, once fragile, was renewed. The Marauders, confronted with an enemy of skill, strategy, and relentless determination, began to retreat in areas where they had once advanced. The intervention had turned the tide of the conflict, showing that courage, preparation, and a willingness to act in the face of uncertainty could achieve what seemed impossible. In the end, the human response to the distress signal was not just a military operation, it was an extraordinary act of commitment to the principle that no call for help should ever be ignored. It proved that even across the vast distances of space, humanity's determination and readiness to face unknown dangers could make the difference between extinction and survival. The Varelians would remember this moment forever, not only for the lives saved, but for the undeniable demonstration of what it meant to act with courage, precision, and compassion in a universe that could often be cruel and unforgiving. The moment Varus 9's skies were cleared of the Marauders, and the surviving Varelians saw the human ships hovering above their cities, there was a sense of relief that seemed almost tangible. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, the citizens could breathe without fear of instant annihilation. Children peeked out of their shelters. Elders smiled through exhausted faces, and streets slowly began to fill with cautious movement. Human and Varelian teams worked side by side, repairing damage, rescuing those still trapped, and distributing aid. It seemed for a brief shining moment that the nightmare was over. Celebrations were whispered in the streets. Small victories cheered quietly in ruined squares, and the Varelians dared to imagine the future again. But peace, as fragile as it often is, never lasts unchallenged. Unknown to both humans and Varelians, the very act of sending the SOS, which had summoned help so bravely, had also done something far more dangerous. The signal, while carefully designed, carried with it subtle energy patterns that were detectable by far-reaching sensors across the galaxy. These patterns were unique, almost like a fingerprint of a civilization crying for aid. To the Deathworlders, a species notorious across countless star systems for their aggression, cunning, and complete disregard for life, this signal was a beacon. They could sense not just the SOS itself, but the vulnerabilities it revealed. The Deathworlders were feared for a reason. They had conquered entire planetary systems, leaving devastation in their wake. Their ships were massive, nearly indestructible, bristling with weapons, and piloted by warriors whose intelligence was matched only by their ruthlessness. Legends of the Deathworlders were whispered in human and alien circles alike. Entire fleets had vanished, entire planets had fallen, and very few species had ever survived an encounter with them. To have their attention drawn so clearly to Varus 9 was almost unthinkable. Yet the signature of the SOS had done exactly that, painting a bright target in the otherwise obscure reaches of space. Within hours of the humans' initial victory, distant sensors began picking up anomalies, fleets moving through uncharted sectors, massive ships that did not resemble any known designs, and a level of energy output that immediately triggered alarms aboard the human vessels. Commanders on the human ships reviewed the data in disbelief. This isn't a standard Marauder group," one officer said, her voice trembling slightly as the readings continued to stream in. "These signatures are too precise, too coordinated. And the energy readings, they're unlike anything in our databases." It was quickly confirmed. The Deathworlders had traced the SOS. They were coming, and the implications were terrifying. On Varus 9, the Varelians sensed the change before even the humans could explain it. Their long-range detection arrays, normally used to monitor environmental and meteorological conditions, picked up immense energy surges approaching the system. The warships humans had deployed now seemed small in comparison to the magnitude of what was heading their way. Leaders convened urgently, gathering in the same crystal council halls that had once been filled with despair. The reality of the situation struck like a cold wind. What was supposed to be a rescue operation could very quickly become a death sentence, not just for the Varelians, but for the humans who had so courageously intervened. The sudden turn of events demanded an immediate re-evaluation of strategy. Humans and Varelians had spent days coordinating their forces against Marauders, learning to work together, and gradually reclaiming lost ground. Now all of that preparation seemed insufficient. The Deathworlders were a completely different kind of threat, Highly intelligent, incredibly adaptive, and merciless. Past experience and simulation exercises could not fully prepare anyone for what they were about to face. Commanders and leaders on both sides held long discussions, sometimes heated, sometimes desperate, weighing every possible option. Retreat was considered, but in deep space nowhere was truly safe. Fighting in orbit, defending cities, and preparing the population for the impending storm became their immediate priorities. Communication channels buzzed constantly. Humans worked to translate and understand alien communications faster than ever, sharing tactical ideas with the Varelians. Alien scientists helped human engineers adapt defensive technology, creating hybrid systems that could withstand the immense firepower the Deathworlders were likely to bring. Civilians were evacuated from high-risk areas, shelters were reinforced, and escape routes planned. Every human and Varelian became aware of the enormity of the threat looming over their heads. Yet they also understood that panicking would only worsen the situation. Discipline, coordination, and calm would be the difference between survival and disaster. The psychological weight of this revelation was immense. For the Varelians, who had already witnessed the destruction of their cities and the death of friends and family, the thought of an even more deadly enemy arriving was almost too much to bear. Some feared they would see their civilization wiped out entirely, but seeing the humans stand ready, already strategizing and preparing for battle, sparked a renewed determination. The human presence was not just physical protection, it was a psychological anchor. It reminded the Varelians that they were not alone in the face of annihilation. Human crews, on their side, adjusted tactics in real time. Fleet formations were modified to anticipate massive waves of attack. Weapons systems were recalibrated to account for unknown defenses the Deathworlders might possess. Plans that had been designed to fight marauders were discarded in favor of contingency strategies suitable for a species that had never shown mercy or hesitation. Every sensor scan, every simulation, every communication between ships became critical. It was no longer enough to defend a single city or region. The survival of the entire planet hung in the balance. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders were moving with chilling precision. Their fleet, immense and almost impossibly fast, followed the traces of the SOS across light years. They did not attack blindly. They were calculating, analyzing, and preparing for a strike that would overwhelm unprepared defenses. Their intelligence was legendary. They had already studied countless civilizations and knew how to exploit weaknesses. Varus 9, marked clearly by the energy signature of the SOS, was now their next target. The challenge for humans and Varelians was not just to fight. They had to anticipate an enemy that seemed to know instinctively how to destroy them. As night fell on Varus 9, the contrast between hope and dread could not have been starker. The sky still carried the human fleet's lights, a beacon of protection and courage. But far beyond, unseen by the naked eye, the Deathworlder ships approached like a storm on the horizon. Humans and Varelians alike understood that the days ahead would be unlike anything they had ever faced. What had started as a mission to rescue a beleaguered civilization was about to become a desperate fight for survival against a force that might make the Marauders' previous attacks look minor in comparison. In a few short hours, plans were finalized. Defensive perimeters were established, key structures were reinforced, and the population was instructed to remain calm while preparing for the possibility of evacuation. Humans shared not only military expertise but also survival strategies, teaching Varelians how to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. And even as fear gnawed at everyone's minds, there was an unspoken determination. They would not abandon Varus 9. The planet had called for help, humans had answered, and together, they would stand against whatever came next, even if that meant facing the galaxy's most feared warriors. The realization of what was coming settled like a heavy shadow over everyone on Varus 9. Victory, celebrations had been fleeting, replaced now by intense focus and preparation. The SOS that had once symbolized hope had inadvertently marked the planet as a target for a far deadlier enemy. And yet, amidst the fear, the alliance between humans and Varelians held firm, ready to face the challenge head-on. They had no choice. The fate of the planet, and perhaps the survival of two species, depended on their courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve in the face of unimaginable danger. When the humans and Varelians realized the full scale of the threat heading toward Varus 9, fear and urgency filled every heart. The Deathworlders were not just any enemy. They were a force of pure destruction, calculated, intelligent, and merciless. If left unchecked, their arrival would mean the end of the planet, the extinction of the Virelians, and possibly the loss of countless other civilizations nearby. Yet in the face of almost certain annihilation, both humans and aliens made a decision that would change everything. They chose to fight together. They forged an alliance unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. This alliance was not simple or easy. Humans and Virelians had very different ways of thinking, different approaches to strategy, and even entirely different languages and communication styles. Yet necessity pushed them to find common ground. Alien engineers worked alongside human military tacticians, exchanging ideas and combining knowledge to create something new and extraordinary. Alien energy shields were adapted to human weaponry, creating defensive structures that could absorb impacts from attacks far stronger than either species had faced before. Humans, in turn, shared their expertise in coordination, battlefield logistics, and rapid response strategies, teaching Virelians how to make split-second decisions in combat scenarios. On the ground, the citizens of Varus 9 watched as streets once filled with terror and despair were transformed into strongholds of resistance. The humans trained small squads of Virelian fighters, helping them integrate technology and tactics in ways they had never imagined. Communication drones hovered overhead, relaying instructions in real time, translating commands instantly between languages, and coordinating the movements of every soldier, both human and alien. What had once been a scattered defense became a cohesive, synchronized force, capable of responding to attacks in seconds rather than minutes. In orbit, the battles were just as intense. Human warships, massive and technologically advanced, coordinated with Virelian aerial units and orbital cannons. They formed formations that allowed them to protect key areas of the planet, while targeting the Deathworlder fleets efficiently. Every move was calculated, yet there was room for improvisation, a signature of human ingenuity. Pilots learned to anticipate the enemy's strategies, to use the alien technology in ways it was not originally designed for, creating unexpected advantages that often turned the tide of skirmishes. Skirmishes erupted across the surface of Varus 9, each one a test of courage, adaptability, and determination. Small squads of humans and Virelians defended city sectors, countering attacks with speed and precision. Civilians were evacuated to safe zones, but the combat zones were where the bravery of the Alliance shone most. The Deathworlders were relentless, attacking in waves using tactics designed to overwhelm and terrify. They were stronger, faster, and more aggressive than any enemy humans had faced before. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, the combined forces stood their ground. Every wave was met with resistance, every advance was countered, and slowly, imperceptibly at first, the momentum began to shift. Improvisation became key. The humans had a long history of adapting to unpredictable situations, and they taught the Virelians how to think creatively under pressure. Drones were repurposed as decoys, energy fields were redirected to create choke points, and alien communication networks were hacked and integrated with human systems to confuse the attackers. Each innovation, each daring maneuver built upon the last, gradually forming a defensive network that was far greater than the sum of its parts. Even the Deathworlders, known for their analytical precision, found themselves challenged by tactics they could not predict. The fighting was grueling. Days and nights blurred together as both species pushed themselves to the limits. Every victory was hard-won, every loss mourned but learned from. Humans and Virelians worked tirelessly to repair damage, redistribute resources, and protect civilians, while continuing to advance their strategic positions. The battlefield became a classroom, a testing ground where courage, ingenuity, and collaboration turned fear into action. Soldiers began to trust one another across species lines, learning to anticipate each other's moves, cover each other's weaknesses, and celebrate successes together. As the Deathworlders pressed harder, their attacks becoming more coordinated and aggressive, the human-Virelian alliance adapted. Energy shields were strengthened, orbital strikes became more precise, and ground forces were deployed in rapid response teams capable of intercepting attacks before they reached populated areas. Humans' knowledge of alien languages allowed them to coordinate with local forces more efficiently, while Virelian technology gave the humans a crucial edge in mobility and defense. Together, they were creating something neither species could have achieved alone: a network of resistance that could withstand even a devastating force like the Deathworlders. Over time, their efforts began to pay off. Individual skirmishes were won, enemy units destroyed, and key strategic points secured. While the Deathworlders had initially seemed unstoppable, they now faced resistance unlike any they had ever encountered. What had begun as a desperate attempt to survive was becoming a true demonstration of the power of cooperation and combined intelligence. The humans' reputation for adaptability and courage became clear to the Verelians, who saw firsthand how determination could turn the tide even against a seemingly invincible enemy. It was not just about survival. It was about stopping the Deathworlders from spreading further across the galaxy. Every wave of attack repelled meant that nearby star systems, potentially rich in resources and life, were safe from the Predator's conquest. Varus 9 was the front line, but the humans and Verelians knew that their actions had consequences beyond their own planet. The alliance they had forged was now a shield not only for one civilization, but for the safety of countless others. In the end, the human-Verelian collaboration achieved what had seemed impossible at the beginning of the crisis. Against all odds, they repelled wave after wave of attacks, defending the cities, protecting the population, and eventually forcing the Deathworlders to retreat. Varus 9, though scarred and battered, remained standing. The combined forces had proven that courage, ingenuity, and unity could overcome even the most fearsome adversaries. And as humans and Verelians surveyed the planet together, they realized that their bond had grown far stronger than anyone had anticipated. What had started as a rescue mission had become a defining moment for both species. They had not only saved a planet, they had created a new standard for interstellar cooperation. The victories were not just tactical, they were symbolic. Humanity had shown that even when facing overwhelming odds, determination and collaboration could prevail. The Verelians had learned that courage could be found not only in themselves, but in the allies they chose to trust. Together they had rewritten what was possible, proving that even in the darkest moments, hope, strategy, and unity could stand against the galaxy's most terrifying forces. Months had passed since the chaos and destruction that had threatened Varus 9, and slowly, almost miraculously, life on the planet began to regain a sense of normalcy. Where once towering cities had been reduced to ruins, the first signs of reconstruction appeared. Buildings that had been shattered by marauder bombardments and the relentless attacks of the Deathworlders were now rising from the rubble, rebuilt stronger and more resilient than before. Streets that had been silent and empty now echoed with the sounds of construction, conversation, and the laughter of children returning to a life that once seemed impossible. The planet itself seemed to breathe again, as greenery returned to scorched parks. Alien flowers blossomed in careful rows, and streams that had been choked with dust and debris began to flow once more. The Verelians, a species that had faced the brink of extinction, were determined not just to survive but to thrive. The rebuilding of Varus 9 was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not merely an effort to restore what had been lost. It was a celebration of resilience, creativity, and the extraordinary cooperation between two very different species. Alien architects and engineers worked side by side with human technicians, combining knowledge, styles, and technology to create structures that were both practical and beautiful. Towers of gleaming crystal now rose alongside human-designed spires and fortified buildings, blending aesthetics with function. Bridges that spanned rivers and chasms incorporated both alien energy fields and human mechanical engineering, creating passageways that shimmered with light at night and withstood forces far greater than natural disasters. This fusion of technology and artistry reflected more than architectural innovation. It symbolized the bond that had formed between the Verelians and humans, a partnership born out of necessity but strengthened by trust, courage, and shared triumph. Monuments were among the most striking features of the rebuilt cities. These towering memorials were not only works of art, but symbols of hope and remembrance. They fused alien sculpting techniques with human materials salvaged from the fleet that had come to their aid. Some were carved from the translucent crystals native to Varus 9, interlaced with human metals and alloys recovered from wreckage, while others incorporated glowing energy cores that pulsed softly, echoing the heartbeat of the planet and the alliance that had saved it. Across the surfaces of these monuments were inscriptions etched in multiple languages and symbolic scripts, but the message was simple and profound. We asked. Humans came. We survived. This phrase became a mantra for the Varelians, a constant reminder of both the peril they had endured and the unexpected friendship that had saved their civilization. The story of Varus 9 did not remain confined to the planet. Across interstellar networks, news of the planet's survival and the extraordinary cooperation between humans and Varelians spread rapidly. The tale became a subject of fascination and discussion in countless star systems. Scholars debated the strategic decisions that had led to survival. Military analysts studied the tactics that had repelled the Deathworlders, and diplomats considered the implications for interstellar relations. For many species, the events of Varus 9 were both a warning and a source of inspiration. The warning was clear. Sending out a call for help, even in desperation, can attract attention beyond what one might expect, sometimes from forces more dangerous than the original threat. The SOS that had summoned humans had also marked Varus 9 for the Deathworlders, a predator species whose ruthlessness was legendary. This lesson resonated across galaxies, reminding civilizations that every action has consequences, often far-reaching and unforeseen. At the same time, the story served as a beacon of hope. It showed that even in the darkest of times, help could arrive from unexpected places. The humans, a species known for their courage and unpredictability, had crossed light years to save a civilization they had never encountered before. Their willingness to act, to put themselves in danger for the sake of others, demonstrated a quality that fascinated and inspired countless species. In many star systems, discussions arose about the potential of alliances with humanity, even if some leaders remained cautious about their unpredictability. The reputation of humans as both fearless and dependable began to spread, cementing their status as a species capable of both heroic deeds and startling ingenuity. They were unpredictable, yes, but they had proven that their intervention could turn the tide in situations that seemed hopeless. For the Varelians, the impact of the events went beyond survival. It reshaped their culture, their worldview, and their identity. The memory of fear and despair lingered, but it was now intertwined with pride, gratitude, and the knowledge that their species could endure unimaginable challenges. Children grew up learning about the arrival of humans not as a story of distant legends, but as a lived history that had shaped their lives. Educators incorporated the lessons of strategy, courage, and cooperation into their teachings, while artists created murals, songs, and holographic displays to commemorate the alliance. Festivals emerged that celebrated the rebuilding of cities, the survival of their culture, and the humans who had become unlikely heroes in their history. These celebrations were not just for remembrance, they reinforced the values of resilience, ingenuity, and trust that had saved Varus 9. The monuments, with their inscriptions, became pilgrimage sites, attracting visitors from other planets who wanted to witness the unity and resilience of the Varelian people. Diplomats and interstellar travelers came to study the integration of alien and human technologies, marveling at the creativity and problem-solving that had gone into rebuilding the planet. Each monument told a story, not just of survival, but of the extraordinary power of alliance. The phrase "we asked, humans came, we survived," echoed through the halls of schools, council chambers, and public spaces, a constant reminder that even in the vast, often hostile galaxy, collaboration could achieve the impossible. At the same time, Varus 9's recovery had strategic implications. Neighboring star systems, some previously under threat from the Deathworlders, observed the events closely. The human intervention had prevented the Deathworlders from expanding their dominion further, creating a buffer zone of safety for nearby civilizations. Analysts, military commanders, and political leaders across the galaxy reevaluated their perceptions of humanity. They noted that humans were not only capable of rapid, decisive action, but could also work across cultural and technological boundaries, integrating knowledge in ways that others could not predict. This unpredictability, while sometimes concerning, became a defining trait of humans in the eyes of many species, a species that could be both savior and wildcard, capable of reshaping events on a galactic scale. The story of Varus 9 also highlighted the delicate balance between risk and reward in interstellar affairs. The SOS had brought both salvation and danger. illustrating that decisions taken in desperation could have far-reaching consequences. Civilizations learned that asking for help was not a simple act, it was a gamble, one that could invite both allies and adversaries. Yet the ultimate outcome showed that courage, trust, and the willingness to act could overcome even the most daunting threats. The Varelians' survival, made possible by their alliance with humans, demonstrated that even the most perilous decisions could yield extraordinary results when guided by wisdom, determination, and unity. Over time, the rebuilt cities, monuments, and restored landscapes of Varus 9 became symbols not just of survival but of hope and possibility. Visitors and historians reflected on the lessons learned, that civilizations must weigh risks carefully, that trust can be a powerful tool, and that the right allies, though they may be unpredictable, can change the course of history. Humanity's intervention became a case study in interstellar cooperation, cited across systems as an example of courage, adaptability, and the impact of decisive action. The Varelians, forever marked by their experience, became advocates for building alliances, sharing knowledge, and remaining vigilant against threats while remaining open to cooperation. In the end, the story of Varus 9 carried a message that resonated far beyond its surface and cities. It reminded the galaxy that survival often depends on courage, ingenuity, and the ability to forge unexpected alliances. The Varelians had survived because they asked for help at a critical moment, and because humans, fearless, resourceful, and determined, had answered. The monuments stood as eternal reminders of that truth, their inscriptions repeating endlessly. We asked. Humans came. We survived. Through this story, civilizations across the stars learned that while calls for help may bring danger, the right allies, though risky, could turn the tide in ways no one could predict. Humanity had proven itself a savior, a force of hope, and a reminder that courage, commitment, and unity can leave an indelible mark on the galaxy, shaping destinies far beyond a single planet.